J'ouvre maintenant la séance. Je voudrais reconnaître que cette réunion a lieu sur le territoire traditionnel.
I'd like to recognize that today's meeting is taking place in hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of June 23rd, 2022. Welcome to meeting number 66.
We are holding the meeting in a hybrid format pursuant to the House Order of Thursday, June the 23rd. Now, while public health authorities and the Board of Internal Economy no longer mandates mask wearing, I again would like to tell everyone that based on the fact that the World Health Organization still considers it to be a pandemic, for your own safety and that of others, I hope that you would consider wearing a mask in rooms that aren't ventilated specifically. Now, I'd like to take this opportunity to remind all participants of this meeting that screenshots or taking photos of the screen is not permitted. The proceedings will be made available on the House of Commons website. And pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, September the 20th, the committee is meeting to continue its study on safe sport in Canada. You all know in the room here how to access interpretation. And those of you who are virtual, you know that there is a little globe at the bottom of your screen, and please press it and access interpretation via that method. So, thank you. And now today, as our witnesses in Safe Sport in Canada, the first witness for the first hour of this meeting will be the Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner, Sarah Eve Pelletier, Sport Integrity Commissioner, by video conference. Ms. Pelletier, you have 5 minutes to present, and what I will do is I will say 30 seconds when you have 30 seconds left, because sometimes if you're reading something, you don't get to look up and see a little flashcard saying 30 seconds. So I'd like you to begin now, please, and welcome Ms. Pelletier for 5 minutes. Thank you.
Madame la Présidente, chers membres du comité.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, as all Canadians who have heard a lot of involvement in sports, I thank you for your enormous commitment to improve the background in sports for all women. And I thank the Standing Committee on Women's Affairs.
That changes are made so that Canadians at all levels can experience sport in safe and welcoming environments. I have no doubt that the work of these committees, thanks in large part to the many athletes who have shared their knowledge and their experiences, will result in valuable and concrete recommendations. I look forward to learning from these studies, and my intention today is to provide as much information as possible in order to help in our shared effort to make sports safer. The Office of the Sport Integrity Commissioner began its role 8 months ago to administer and uphold the Universal Code of Conduct to prevent and address maltreatment in sport, the UCCMS. 53 federally funded sport organizations have now signed up with our office. 36 of these are effective today. Athletes and others are now able to safely bring forward complaints of maltreatment and discrimination against participants under the authority of signatory organizations and to be heard by trauma-informed experts. Each matter being investigated is looked at by independent professionals with combined experience in human rights, sexual violence, working with children and minors. We have admitted 100% of cases that fall within our jurisdiction. Concretely, this means 17 matters currently are progressing and being investigated by independent professionals. As an outcome of these cases, sanctions could and will be imposed against individual participants who have committed violations, and those sanctions are directly enforceable. Also, recognizing from day one in this office the importance of addressing systemic issues and ensuring organizational accountability, we developed and launched an assessment process to look into sport organizations. This will lead to publicly available assessment reports, and to help foster meaningful implementation, a follow-up monitoring report will later be published to track the actual changes the organization makes after the assessment. It is, of course, essential that organizations act on the recommendations they receive. But we hope these public reports will be tools that increase accountability and equip others, such as funding partners in sport, to take appropriate measure in response to the organization's actions. As we continue building our foundations, we're conscious of current structural limitations of the OSEC. Let me provide a bit more context to those, and of course, I'd be happy to answer any questions in more details. First, the UCCMS clearly identifies the need for a publicly searchable registry of sanctions so that people who are sanctioned can no longer move from one jurisdiction to another. The OSEC has the mandate, and it does maintain a sanctions registry today, but due to current privacy law across various jurisdictions, there are challenges in making information publicly available. A possible solution to that could be for a public sanctions registry to become statutorily mandated. Second, participation in OSEC investigation cannot currently be compelled for those individuals and organizations that have not signed on to the UCCMS. As some groups have suggested, subpoena powers for independent investigators and assessors could make for a stronger and more robust complaint and assessment process. Third, beyond the OSEC, the effect systemic and sustainable advancement of safe sport, it is paramount to have a harmonized system of rules that pertain to maltreatment and discrimination and trustworthy means to address issues across all levels and through all structures of Canadian sport. There should simply be no gap preventing people from getting help or creating loopholes for those looking to cause harm. Similarly, prevention and education needs to start from coaches, parents, and youth at the grassroots level where they get their start in sport, knowing their rights, knowing their responsibilities. Across the board, safe sport knowledge needs to be as fundamental as technical skills, as the rules of the games. Notre bureau poursuit sa mission d'avancement du sport.
Our office continues to pursue its mission of promotion and advancement of safe sport for all, while recognizing our commitment and significant measures and recommendations we must take in order to advance this important priority. I've been a competitive athlete over 17 years. I've made lifelong friends and I've learned precious lessons which serve me well today. It's become very clear to me that I've been privileged to have had the experiences that were positive. I find it tragic that so many youth in Canada have not had the same chance. We must urgently eliminate all mistreatment in sports practiced. Sport has so much to offer. And in closing, that's why it is so important for me to listen to their stories and listen to their collective voice. This is why it is important to mobilize in order to make sport safe for all Canadian, male and female. Thank you very much.
And now we're going to go to the question and answer part of the meeting. I would like, however, to ensure that the committee, I know you know, but I want to remind you that we are dealing with very sensitive issues here. And I would like to remind you that we shouldn't be naming names and calling people or trying to re-victimize anyone whose name is out there. I think we need to be very sensitive to the nature of what we're doing here and to be very careful about how we deal with some of these issues. I know you know that, guys. I am not telling you don't. I just want to make a reminder here so that we know for sure that we're going to be sensitive. So thank you very much. Now begin my first round, which is a 6-minute round. And we begin for the Conservatives with Kevin Waugh. Kevin, 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madam Pelche, and congratulations. You've been on the job now for about 7-8 months. The word harmonized safe sport, it's been used by you lots, and the problem in this country is the provincial governments haven't signed on. And so you're not representing everybody in this country, OSIC and the UCCMS. In fact, the Minister of Sport has had to go to the Canada Winter Games this weekend in the Maritimes to talk not only to athletes, but the provincial bodies, because they haven't signed on to OSIC. This is an issue. So we've spent $16 million over 3 years to form OSIC, and yet we don't have, to my knowledge, other than Quebec, that started one in 2014, we don't have any provincial governments to this date that have signed on unless they have in the last 48 hours or so. Can you comment on the issue of sport, safe sport, when the provinces and clubs have not signed on?
Thank you for your question and your comment. We know that participants and youth and people in Canada enjoy sport at all levels of participation, but most enjoy sports in their community, in their clubs. And for that, you rightfully so that this is under the jurisdiction of the provincial territorial bodies. To make sure that the issue is tackled and to make sure that there is sustainable change. And I want to say also there's urgency to act around it, because one case of maltreatment is one too many. This simply has to stop. This simply has to go away from sport. And for it to be true, it needs to impact all levels, all structures of sport, no matter how sport is organized. That cannot be used as, I want to say, an excuse to addressing the matter. The matter needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed so that everyone who participates in sport has the same rights, the same responsibilities, but also has access to the same, or at least, as you said, harmonized services and ways to address their matters.
My recollection would be that OSIC really looks after 3,700 or 4,000 athletes. You don't have control of the provincial governments. I would think the sports minister should have had this dialogue a year ago with every sport and territorial sport body in this country. We are in dying hours, and all of a sudden she's going to the Canada Winter Games to have this discussion when really 8 months into the job, this should have been done a year ago. I'm just floored. I've talked to my people in my province. They're not signing on to this. And I'm not the only province from Saskatchewan. We only have Quebec. And they signed on their own back in 2014. There is a huge gap with your organization, just a huge gap. So, 80% of the athletes in this country aren't covered because you're only covering 3,700 to 4,000. You're talking about the NSOs. You're not talking provincial or club sports, which is a huge gap in OSIC. And it needs to be corrected long ago. And here we are. You got 53 NSOs signed on. You're still short of a capacity, but we don't have any provincial dialogue, which is essential to make this a safe sport in the country of Canada. If it's not going to be at the provincial level, this is a dud of a program, if you don't mind me saying.
So you're correct that our jurisdiction and the contractual mandate that we receive from the federal government extends to federally funded sport organizations. And as I said today, we have 53 organizations signed on, and every day we are adding new ones. As you have mentioned, there is urgency to ensure that there are harmonized rules and harmonized systems in place to hear for victims to safely turn to at all levels of sport. The OSIC, the services of the OSIC are available for those provincial and territorial organizations or decision makers if these are the services that respond to their respective needs. As you have mentioned, Quebec, but I also want to cite New Brunswick, have, as of today, a system in place. And I understand that other provincial and territorial authority are also very actively looking into this. Of course, I cannot speak on their behalf. And from my perspective, from an OSIC perspective, there is urgency around it. And our mandate will be most effectively fulfilled when there's a complete system, when there are no gaps in the system, whether it be through OSIC or through other harmonized places or forums that we can engage with and collaborate with towards the same mission to make sport safe.
Ms. Pelche, I'm very disappointed in the Minister of Sport. It's been all talk and no action. And now it's on the 24th hour, she decides it needs to be addressed. Going to the Canada Winter Games, talking to the provincial bodies, this should have been done long ago. So here you are, you've got $16 million over 3 years to act under OSIC. That's fine for the NSOs, but nobody's worrying about the clubs. Nobody is worrying about the provincial bodies in this country. Okay, you got New Brunswick signed on. That's a new one. Congratulations. But where are the rest? I mean, this is the gap that people in my country, my province, my city are talking about. This is where it starts, and we're so far behind in this.
Thank you, Kevin. That's it. You've just reached your 6 minutes, and I'm now going to go to the Liberals for Tim Lewis. 6 minutes, Tim.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As you mentioned off the top, that there may be some listening to this public testimony on the study that could be affected, and I understand the need not to re-traumatize everyone. So in my riding of Kitchener-Conestoga, if there's someone who needs support, there are two organizations in my region. There's the Women's Crisis Service of Waterloo Region and the Sexual Assault Support Center, also of Waterloo Region. So help is out there. Ms. Pelletier, thank you so much for being here. Very, very appreciated. As the Office of Sport Integrity Commissioner, I understand that you're in charge of the central hub for Canada's new independent safe sport program. And I'm pleased to hear that the mandate is to independently receive and investigate allegations of abuse and code of conduct violations. And just for those listening, some of the mandate is to provide safe spaces for athletes to have their voices heard in a non-traumatic way, to launch independent investigations, recommend sanctions against individuals that you mentioned off the top who are found to have committed violations, receive reports about violations through a confidential online platform, which is very important, and offer education and prevention tools and resources, including mental health and legal aid referrals. So you know personally how great sports can be. It gives kids confidence, helps them achieve goals, learn life skills. As parents, that's why we're encouraging our children to get involved in sports. And every parent should be able to feel confident that their kids are safe. So given the concern in sports that we're hearing in studies like this, what message would you like to give to those parents? What needs to change at all levels of government, and how can that system be strengthened so that every child can have the same positive experience that you've had?
Thank you very much. And I want to say that as a young parent myself, I share the same concern as all the other parents in Canada. And my advice would be for anyone, regardless of the hat we're wearing in the Canadian sports system right now, is that there is an opportunity to make sure we focus at all levels and right now on prevention and education. So knowing our rights, knowing our responsibilities in whichever capacity that we play is not a guarantee for sure, but is the one thing I believe that every parent can start doing, asking questions, being curious, try to get to understand so that they can be there to support their child in their journey in sport and make sure that journey is as positive as it should be. So in terms of the things that need to happen, I did mention education and prevention because we can have all the means to address issues of maltreatments once they have occurred. But what we really need to face together and what we really need to tackle is to make sure that those incidents or instances don't happen in the first place. And there are lots of things that can be done and should be done to achieve that, but prevention and education needs to be one of them and needs to be at the core. And I want to say prevention and education cannot be something theoretical. It needs to be concrete. It needs to be something that is living and breathing in every training venue, in every sport, in every club, in every place that sport is kind of coming to life, because this is truly how that transformation will happen and will be sustained.
And you mentioned in your opening statement about safe sport knowledge and that we need this grass level support. What resources and tools, prevention tools, resources, including the mental health and legal aid services, does the Office of Sport Integrity Commission help with right now?
Of course, we talked about the services, the complaint management services of the OSIC being restricted or somehow limited in their jurisdiction. But I want to use the opportunity to clarify that any work being done in terms of prevention, education, sharing of resources, sharing of best practices, policies, is for the benefit of the entire Canadian sport community. We're working in research program, there's a research grant program, there's an education accreditation program, so that above and beyond what the OSIC itself is doing, there is tremendous knowledge through the academics. There is tremendous knowledge through those who provide education to really leverage that collective efforts and collective engagement towards prevention and education. So I just want to make sure that this is a place where there's an opportunity, yes, for the OSIC to disseminate, to propose education and resources in an area where we strongly believe that should be some investment in, and we're invested ourselves, but there's so much more that needs to happen there from ourselves and we believe at all levels of sport. And in terms of, you mentioned the mental health and legal aid programs, these are services that are provided to for people who engage in our processes. But I was pleased for you to mention other resources in the beginning of your remarks, because we also want to make sure that we provide resources or access to resources that may be existing outside of the OSIC, and we facilitate the access to those resources, whether they be in a community or elsewhere, for people who need them when they engage in a process with us.
The half a minute I have, only 4,000 athletes fall under federal jurisdiction, and the signatories for the national sport organizations are there, but the provinces are yet to step up. Are they saying they don't want to step up, or what is their hesitation as a provincial? Because at the end of the day, we're trying to protect our children here.
I want to say that everyone shares the same desire to make sports safe for everyone. I cannot speak on behalf of the ministers and these authorities at the provincial territorial level, but there are some that have engaged with us and would be interested in using OSIC services. And there are others that have existing system in place or are looking for the best way to address it. I just want to say there's urgency to act on it from our perspective.
Appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Lewis. And now we go to the Bloc Québécois. Sébastien Lemire. Sébastien, 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you all for the welcome here. Madame Pelletier, first of all, thank you for being here. And thank you for recognizing the work of the Standing Committee on Women's Affairs and the fact that you've had great experience as an athlete yourself. Your organization fills a very important gap, but I think we're trying to build an airplane in flight without having done a complete analysis. With much humility, you've mentioned your mandate, and of course, perhaps we should have an independent inquire into sports. I think that the whole field, the whole sector is not in good health. We've heard from Martin Leclerc this morning and other articles by Mr. Wested, the whole media. We only move when the media highlights something going on in sport. And I think that to change things, we need to analyze, diagnose the disease, if you will. It's not by giving Band-Aid solutions that we're going to resolve the situation. We need real action, real measures, and an independent inquiry would help you have a solid basis to allow you to act to correct these wrongs. Well, thank you very much for your comment and your questions. It is true that to a certain degree, if we were to recognize the urgency the Office of the Sports Integrity Commissioner has established, or is still continuing to build on this foundation, solid foundation. We also feel the urgency to start to pilot this plane that you mentioned. Our office was created over many years of consultations, negotiations, which highlighted the current problems and situations, and we were created to deal with these issues. All initiatives, any initiatives that will make sports safer and provide support, adequate support to our athletes is welcomed by our office. You mentioned the possibility of a public inquiry on the matter. We are very interested to see the recommendations of the various parliamentary committees to see what steps to take to correct the situation. Well, listen, I'd like to repeat my confidence and trust in your organization and in yourself for this mandate and mission. in order to understand the limits of your mandate and to continue to improve it and widen it. All organizations should be registered. Don't you think they should be mandatory? Well, federally, all organizations which receive any federal funding have the obligation to register, to become accredited. Our national sports organizations, our NSOs, have been given a set of constraints and conditions that they should follow, or otherwise lose their funding. Well, a lot of structural gaps, but there might be means to sort of detour the UCCMS. Well, I don't think any organization should fail to follow these recommendations, and no one should fear a public inquiry and offer to the public and sports practitioners that they are entitled to have a robust system which will allow the practice of their sport, whatever it be, in a safe and favorable manner. Of course, our mandate is somewhat limited for the organization, so the question might best be addressed directly to the federal authorities. Do you think you'll get 100% participation or registration by April? We need a system that's as complete as possible, as quickly as possible. So I sincerely wish it, but our efficiency is hampered and constrained otherwise. Are you aware of Judge Perel on the torture and other maltreatment in the Canadian Hockey League? High-performance junior hockey in Canada. Violence, levels of violence, completely unacceptable in 38 of the leagues here in Canada. I think I did take knowledge of that information and the report of the justice. And I have the same reaction as almost all Canadians have had vis-a-vis this report. Shock at the violence and mistreatment. Well, as the department or agency that has to ensure the code of conduct, what would you recommend? Well, the nature of these incidents, prohibited action, prohibited violence should be subject to sanctions under the code, and sanctions which have teeth that could ban some participation in sports and for life if necessary. If you cite a particular example, it doesn't mean that the participants in question are those who are under the authority of Sports Canada or under the office of the Sports Integrity Commissioner. I would agree with most Canadians, all Canadians in fact, that this is unacceptable behavior, completely prohibited, and there has to be some sanctions that could be applied against individuals. But for them to come from the Office of Sports Integrity Commissioner, it has to come into our mandate. Thank you very much.
Now I go to the New Democratic Party for 6 minutes. Peter Julian. Peter.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Madame Pelletier, and congratulations on your promotion. We all share that sports in Canada is in a crisis situation. We see it every day. Ever since we began our study, it's not safe for our children, for our youth, and for our adults. There's a lot of work we yet have to do so that we have an environment in sports that athletes can give their best without any danger or fear of mistreatment or discrimination. You spoke of 17 cases or files that are under consideration, under study right now. Can you tell us what categories these belong to, these 17 cases, or these alleged violence or abuse cases? Can you give us some breakdown as to what we're talking of? Well, Our mandate deals with instances of maltreatment or other behavior of discrimination which have led to abusive situations. This is the type of file or case that we're dealing with. The definition of mistreatment can take on many applications. It could be sexual, mental, physical abuse, completely unacceptable behavior, and prohibited. We often say abuse, but that's a very broad term. Situations can continue to carry on. Well, thank you for that. 17 cases, I think, is quite worrisome. I mean, you're just starting up, and you're looking at 17 cases of violence, abuse, sexual in nature sometimes. There's a question of having the resources to deal with all these cases. Now, the authority or the power of these sanctions, how far can you go? Can you refer these cases to the police, for example? Can you ban athletes or coaches or other authority figures from the sport? What are your tools available to you? Well, the sanctions that can be imposed according to our mandate are described in the UCCMS, the Universal Code of Conduct. For participation in sports, we can ban someone. It can be a lifelong ban from participating in a specific sport. Certain behaviors, even if they are in violation of the code, can also be criminal in nature. But our organization cannot substitute itself for the courts, obviously. We cannot judge a case, but we can make conditions difficult for those individuals to participate in sports in future. Criminal acts should be treated as criminal acts. Can you refer some of these instances to criminal authorities? In certain cases, not only can we do so, we also have the obligation and duty to do so. There's a legal obligation to signal this to the police or judicial authorities. Another obligation, we have to report any breach of the code.
Publicly accessible sanctions list. My understanding is you do not have subpoena powers. Have you been speaking with the Minister of Sport or with the federal government about acquiring the ability to put in place a publicly accessible sanctions list and the subpoena powers? Of course, part of the problem we've heard in so many cases is particularly coaches being accused of the most horrendous abuses and then being transferred somewhere else. And because there's no publicly accessible sanctions list, that person continues to work in sports, even though they have the most cruel violation of trust towards athletes.
Absolutely. So the UCCMS does contemplate, and our office has been and continues to really push for the sanctions registry to be publicly available, because as you mentioned, there cannot be any gap for anyone looking to perpetrate harm or cause harm and use loopholes and gaps through jurisdictions and navigate through those. So this is absolutely the reason why we are strongly in favor and actually demand.
Yeah, and has the federal government responded? Has the federal government said yes?
We have had discussions to bring forward the position. And we've been told that this was being under study.
My last question is, have you received a complaint around the discrimination and treatment of the women's national soccer team by Canada Soccer?
So, well, Canada Soccer has signed an agreement
6 seconds.
to be part of user OSIC services. This agreement will be in effect starting March 1st. So I cannot say at this stage that we have received matters that relate to Soccer Canada.
Peter, and now the committee moves into the second round for this hour, and it's a 5-minute round. And I will begin the round with the Conservative Party, Rachel Thomas. Ms. Thomas.
It's me.
Oh.
Actually, Chair, I think it's me. Thanks so much. And thank you, Madam Pelche, for being here today. The committee is very interested to look at the governance of sport and how these incidents that are reported are followed up on. And so where does the $16 million of funding come from?
From federal government, so the Government of Canada, and it is administered by the Sport Dispute Resolution Centre of Canada, the SDRCC, for purposes of the Abuse-Free Sport Program.
Thank you. So I have a concern there that it's not independent. We've heard from a lot of the survivors of abuse that in many cases the fox is watching the hen house, that those who are at the top are not taking action. And we know that the minister has been in the role, several years, and still we see just an ever constant flow of these events. Now, the tracking of sanctions, I thought that was a very good idea. And you mentioned a database where they keep track of them. Does this database exist already, or is it something that you're planning to do and then make public?
We have the mandate, and we maintain a registry of sanctions as of today. The limitation that I have outlined is as it relates to making the information contained on the sanctions registry available publicly, which is what we are saying is needed.
And even if it's not public, like I have a situation in my riding where there was a gymnastics coach who was sanctioned not to be able to go to any tournaments or to coach again, but he's moved on to other provinces, and it's been reported up through Gymnastics Canada, who have done nothing about it. So if gymnastics becomes someone who's part of OSIC and signed on to them, would they be able to then, complain and have actions taken by OSIC to either, bring it forward or somehow take a consequence?
So what will be the factors to determine whether OSIC can look into a particular matter? First, it needs to be a matter related to maltreatment and discrimination or another prohibited behavior. Second, as you have mentioned, the organization needs to be signed on to the OSIC. The third point, which is one that is sometimes a little more tricky, and it speaks to the gaps in the systems currently and how we need to move forward, but it's around the status of the participant. So the person who is alleged to have committed the violation is truly, for lack of a better word, the anchor point to that jurisdiction. The status of the alleged victim, survivor, the people impacted is not determinative, but whoever is the respondent to have alleged to have committed the violation needs to be under the authority of the signatory organizations, for at least OSIC to have the ability to look into the matter. But if we don't have the ability, we at least need to know that there is another place where we can help the person who came forward and accompany them, empower them to be at a place where they can really get the help needed.
I think this is very good. Can you describe, once you have incidents, like you have 17 incidents, and you investigate them, who sees that? Does Sports Canada get to know about that? Does the minister get to know about that? What's the escalation chain?
Thank you. That's a great question. Just one small clarity, but I know you mentioned independence, and it is so important to the athletes and building that trust and that confidence. I just want to clarify that investigations are not performed by our office. They are performed independently by independent investigators, and that the parties, the people who come forward, have an opportunity to raise a concern if they are not comfortable for reasons of conflict, let's say. So that's just a small clarification. But in terms of the information shared, the people who come to OSIC, the one thing that we've heard over and over by athletes is that they want a safe place. They want a place where there cannot be fear of reprisal. And for that, we need to ensure that whenever they come to us, we're able to address their matter with confidentiality. Confidentiality doesn't mean that they cannot speak about what has happened to them. That's completely different. But we're not sharing information about specific cases with anybody outside of the OSIC, that not anybody at the SDRCC, not anybody with Sport Canada. However, we're committed to transparency in terms of our operations, which is why you would have seen our quarterly reports, for example, and we're trying to provide a balance of data that is helpful and advance the conversation of safe sport, yet we cannot compromise the commitment we've made to those who come to us to have their matter being safely heard, and that means protecting their confidentiality as well.
Very good. Thank you. I think that's the end of my time.
Yes, I guess so. Sorry. Yes, you're right. You're 7 seconds over. Very well done, though, Ms. Gladue. Now I go to the Liberals, and it's Chris Biddle. Chris, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And I guess I'll start with a little bit of a comment, because I'm a little bit disappointed. We engaged this study for a while now, and it has been nonpartisan. And there's been some comments worrying me from the Conservative Party, blaming, oddly enough, the federal minister of sport for the inaction by the provinces. And now there's this suggestion of lack of independence. So I guess I'll start my questions there. How do you respond to the notion that you're not independent, or that there'd be a question to your independence?
Thank you. I want to say that I can understand the athlete's perspective or the importance that's been placed on independence, because that has been the very reason why our office was created and the very reason why there has been so many issues in the past. We've talked about the culture of silence. We've talked about issues being dealt with within organizations, within sport organizations themselves, and how that has not been the proper way to address matters. So I can completely understand the perspective and the need for independence. What I can say is that in my role, I only report to the athletes and to the people of the sport community that we're meant to serve. My office and I are only reporting to the athletes and the people of the sport community. And we put every safeguard in place to make sure that we protect that functional independence, because it is so important. And I know trust is not something you have. It's something you earn. And I'm hoping that we'll earn the trust of the athletes through our actions.
Thank you so much. So just to be clear, even though funding does come from the federal government, you receive no direction from federal government officials, the minister's office, or anything like that. Could we compare it maybe even to the federal government pays judges' salaries or RCMP officers' salaries, and they remain independent in their actions?
I'm less familiar with the judiciary and how the funding model goes, but that is exactly what you said. There is absolutely no visibility, direction, or interference whatsoever with anyone outside of the OSIC, near or far, funding or otherwise. We are making those decisions and operating with as all levels of independence possible.
Thank you so much. You had mentioned the suggestion for subpoena power. Have you received reports of lack of cooperation with potential people under investigation?
That's a very good question, and one that's helpful to clarify, because when organizations and their participants are under the OSIC, they have to cooperate, and we have means to enforce that cooperation vis-a-vis the sport organizations and their participants. When we see limitations, and this has been brought by groups of athletes, and we thought this is indeed an important limitation, is our ability to require cooperation in our processes by organizations and individuals that may not be under the authority of the OSIC currently. And so that is an important limitation. And in cases where witnesses would be important to appear, documents would be important to be provided so that we get the best clarity possible in terms of what's going on. Those additional, let's say, measures would make for a stronger process.
Thank you so much. I was wondering if you could expand on the privacy issues that you had mentioned, which relating to the sanctions registry.
Sure. So it relates, as you mentioned, to privacy law across our various jurisdictions and in the country, so both federally but also provincial, territorial. And what has been the model that is currently the one that we would like to adopt is the one that the U.S. Center for Safe Sport have in terms of maintaining a publicly searchable registry of individuals who are under sanction. And the U.S. Center for Safe Sport has that currently. And our understanding is that was made possible because the creation of that registry was mandated statutorily.
So just even the matter of the NSO signing up and agreeing to be part of this doesn't allow for, or excuse me, these privacy issues still come up even though they've agreed to participate. Very quickly, sorry.
That's correct. In terms of making the information publicly available to a large public, that goes beyond what is currently possible.
Thank you very much, Mr. Biddle. And now we go to the Bloc québécois. Sébastien, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Madame...
Thanks again, Madam Chair. Madame Pelletier, the Canadian Hockey League, the majors or the minors or the Western League of Hockey, are they members of your organization? Or Hockey Canada, yes. For the other entities, no. Well, they had committed, I believe, before this very committee in July. We can take a look at the Blues, I guess. So the players who play in those other leagues would be covered by the OSIC. I could not say yes or no for the specific players, but for any participants, be under the authority of OSIC as of today, currently, for hockey, for the leagues that you mentioned, they have to be participants under the authority of Hockey Canada, part of that big family. If they are, yes, it's possible. If they're not, just because they are in another format or organization, they may not be registered with OSIC or Hockey Canada per se. So they have to be covered by a recognized organization. Now, of course, everyone bows to the sports dispute. I'm thinking of another organization, Gymnastics Canada, for example, can address your organization. Should they be looking to another organization, Auditor General, for example? I'm not sure. But what authorities would you need in order to have access to the data so that you can conduct your inquiries? I think you'd be the ombudsman for athletes, of course. And perhaps we could extend or interpret your mandate in that fashion. Well, the independence of the organization is extremely important. The structures which belong to OSIC are detailed in the legislation. And if we have any recommendations from the various committees which serve to increase, if I can say increase, the autonomy of the organization, we're perfectly willing to listen to you.
Up. I'm going to go now to, for the New Democrats, Peter Julian. Peter, 2.5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madame Pelletier, what started our inquiry was the absolutely horrendous allegations coming out of London in 2018 and how Hockey Canada tried to sweep these horrendous allegations under the carpet. If you receive a complaint like that today, how would your office deal with it? How would your office, you're aware of some of the horrendous details, how would your office respond in a way that respects the victim and ensures that justice is obtained?
You mentioned respecting the victim, respecting the trauma that someone may have gone to, survivors, victims, witnesses. This is at the core of what we're meant to do. So that is, I want to emphasize this point because no matter what we do, no matter how we do it, it has to be with the trauma-informed approach and ethic of care, appreciating that experiences of harm are diverse, but that there needs to be very careful attention put on that at every corner. If I cannot speculate about an hypothetical scenario, but Hockey Canada is indeed a signatory organization, and the UCCMS contemplates a wide range of contexts during which the code is in effect and during which the obligations apply. I'll cite in particular section 4.3. I'm sure I won't have time to explain, but I at least want to cite section 4.3 because it really speaks to the breadth of the context during which jurisdiction can be asserted vis-a-vis program signatory organization and the participants who are under the authority of these organizations.
Thank you for that answer. I'm sure if you could provide further information to the committee, that would be helpful. Two short questions to finish. First off, Volleyball Canada is the only organization that is affiliated now or that has signed on at the national, provincial, and club level, as I understand it. What has Volleyball Canada done that other sports organizations aren't doing? And then secondly, how many Canadians have you reached out to and contacted in terms of your prevention and education program?
So in terms of Volleyball Canada, we definitely applaud the approach that they have taken, the proactive approach to engage with their members, their member organizations and their participants at all levels to make sure that that from their perspective there was no gap. That is one possible avenue, recognizing that each sport organization has a different constituency and things in place. But regardless of whether it's through OSIC or otherwise, the importance is that any member at all levels of participation is under harmonized rules and has a safe place to go to. I'm sorry, I missed the second part of your question. My apologies.
I think the time is up, and maybe Peter can get to that question a little bit later on, or maybe someone else might want to pick it up. I go to the Conservatives for 5 minutes. Martin Shields. Martin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you here. Thank you. Ms. Pelche, it's great to have you here, and you've got a wealth of knowledge in a very short term. You've got 53 funded Canadian organizations in Canada. You've got 36 signed up. So there's missing 17 still sports organizations. In the registration process, is there a cost to these organizations? How do they get registered?
Yes, there is a cost to, there's a basic cost, and then there is a cost that applies for every organization. This is information actually around the financials that was provided to for the study on women and girls, and can also be provided to this committee as it could be helpful for you to have this information. I just want to clarify that this information would be provided by the SDRCC, who manages these aspects, because it's managed independently from the OSIC. Once an agreement is in place and effective, organizations and their participants can have access to the services of the OSIC, which is the part that I can speak about.
No, I've got that. But you've got 17 that are missing. And if money is a possible issue, could that be a barrier to them joining?
Oh, when you say 17 are missing, we have those 53 organizations signed and 33 are effective. The 33 effective means it's a population of the 53. And it means that the services are effective today, but organization had the choice basically to use what we call a transition period before the services become effective. So it's not because they haven't signed, it's not because they haven't committed to the financials, it's more that they use that transition period to put the policies in place that are required.
So that's not clear in the information you have, because it looks like there's a gap of 17 missing. So just suggesting that. So in the funding piece, when you say funding may, there's a word may, they may not be funded. May is not shall.
I believe that for the funding questions, because those are measures that pertain to Government of Canada, I think it would be better to just get that clarity on exactly what happens with the funding on April 1st through federal government directly.
Okay, we've talked, the word voluntary has come up a lot of times. So when we're talking about a registry, is it going to take legislation, national legislation, to get a registry in place that really makes a difference?
We're open to avenues that will make us get there as quickly as possible. From our understanding, again, because this is the model that has been adopted in the United States with the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, we understand that it being statutorily mandated made it possible in the United States. Of course, we'd love to get the help of this committee and through recommendations to see what possible avenues there are, whether it be through the Physical Activity and Sport Act or otherwise. But from what we have observed, this has been an effective avenue for the United States.
So you're recommending that we would suggest that as a recommendation?
We want to recommend that there be a sanctions registry that is publicly available as soon as possible.
Statutorily.
I'm not sure this is my position to say how it can be achieved, but I look forward to hearing from recommendations of the committee.
Well, I think you've danced around that, but I think you pretty well have said that. When you're talking about the number of provincial organizations, I know from what we've heard that the minister is out there doing a sales job. Are you doing a similar sales job and trying to convince provinces to join?
So what I'm aware is that in terms of providing explanation information about the Abuse-Free Sport program, those at the SDRCC have been active, engaged with provinces and territories for many months by now, and that I understand some of these conversations are also progressing on our side because we manage the services once they are in place. We have been I believe, vocal in speaking about the gaps right now and the urgency to fill those gaps.
And I'm guessing that's why you're taking a proactive approach. I mean, they're missing. It's a gap. The other one is the clubs. How are you going to get the clubs involved?
Our perspective is that there is an ability through the provincial territorial systems to reach the club directly. If I'm following the example and the system in place in Quebec, just as one example, they created one system that encompasses all clubs, all participants in the province. Of course, I believe they'd be better positioned to speak of their own model, but I understand that it covers all clubs, it covers all provincial organizations in a harmonized and unified manner.
Thank you very much, Mazen. That's it. And I'm going to go to the Liberals now for Lisa Hepner. Lisa, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ms. Pelletier for being here to answer our questions today. I think we've covered a lot of these issues already. I know a lot of my questions already have been covered by my colleagues. So I'm wondering if maybe you could just go into more detail about, first off, this database and how it would work. And if we had a mandate, what exactly would that look like? I know you didn't really want to opine on that, but just from your perspective and in your experience, ideally, how would this work?
Thank you for the question and the opportunity to provide a little bit of what that would entail. So from our perspective, a database or a registry of individuals who are under sanctions is a means for administrators in clubs looking to make hiring decisions. It's a means for parents looking to sign their kids in a club. It's a means for maybe people that, sport is practiced through the federated system, but it also touches even on the school system. There's sport participation in school and everything like that. So people who are participants in Canadian sport, in the absence of something like a public registry, could navigate through gaps in the system. And whether it be within the strict lines of sport or maybe move to things where they can use their skills and perpetuate harm. The goal of a public registry would be to avoid that. It would be a tool that empower the Canadian society as a whole. We think it's a matter of public interest to ensure the safety of our youth, the safety of our children. And the best way to achieve that, of course, with standards of rigor in terms of the information that finds its way there. But the best way to achieve that is to make sure that once individuals are under sanction according to a fair process, there is a way for people to know about that.
So would
No, go ahead, Lisa, sorry.
So would you also mandate that sports organizations have to consult this registry before bringing new people in, or would it simply be for people who have been through a whole process of sanctions to be added to the registry without any onus on the organizations who are hiring or bringing on volunteers?
I think organizational accountability is essential. And people in position of authority as well. I think there are a variety of measures that can accompany and help support the objective of a public registry, and some of which would, in my view, include requirements and as well as potentially best practices and standards that will make sure that the information is used for its intended purposes.
And what about people who face allegations? Maybe there hasn't been a formal sanction process. Maybe they leave the organization and move on to another organization or move to another province. Would those incidents be covered under a database like the one you envision?
The one we envision and the one we currently have in place, even though the information is not shared, is both it's a registry of individuals for which their participation in sport has been impacted, meaning that it can be also information about what we call in our world provisional measures. So while a matter may be ongoing, if a coach is being suspended because the allegations against them are so severe, we also don't want these individuals to go and cause harm or, to your point, resign and go elsewhere. So I think we have to be careful about the type of information in those cases when a matter hasn't been looked at fully with fair and due process and the principles of natural justice. But there is a possibility, and the U.S. Center for Safe Sport, once again, has that model in place where they share that information, but the level and the categorization of the information may be impacted as a result of it not being a final sanction.
In my last few moments here, I'm wondering if you can reflect on whether athletes in the system or athletes who are playing sports today understand your office and the options available to them. Do athletes know right now where to go and how to access the system if they have a complaint of abuse?
I think at the national level, there is increased and better awareness by the athletes, but still it's an important priority of ours to make sure that athletes who are eligible to use our services that they know how to engage. In terms of athletes at all levels of the sports systems, I have mentioned the urgency around the gaps to make sure that everyone has a place to turn to. I do want to mention, however, that we have the Canadian Sport Helpline that is available for all Canadians and all athletes at all levels of participations. And athletes, even if they may not ultimately be admissible to OSIC if they are at the local level and something like that, they can get the services of the helpline today, and there are services and resources that can be accessed by them as of today. But we need to make sure that everyone can have a safe place to go.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Lisa. Now we're going to go to the next round. Thank you very much, Ms. Pelletier, for your testimony and for being so patient with us. We now need to ask the clerk, do we need to suspend so we can unload everyone else? Okay, thank you. So we're going to suspend for a short period of time to allow for the next round of witnesses, please. And thank you again, Ms. Pelletier.
Thank you.
To resume, please, everyone. I think we're ready. I don't know what I did with my mask. Anyway, we are going to begin the next round. And we have present, as you know, we're studying safe sport. And we have present 3 individuals. And they are Jennifer Fraser, who's author and an educational consultant, Canadian Women in Sport with Alison Sandemeyer Graves, who is a chief executive officer, and she's here on video conference. And then we have Global Athlete, represented by Rob Kohler, Director General. And so we have 3 witnesses, and I will begin by letting the witnesses know that you have, as a group, but if there's only one of you for each group, you have 5 minutes. I will give you a 30-second voice warning, and so that you can round it up, because we don't have as much time as we would like in this round, and we would like to get around to hearing from you. So I will begin with Ms. Fraser. For 5 minutes, please, Ms. Fraser.
Thank you. Our son started skating at 2 years of age and began playing hockey at 5. As he got older, he also played competitive soccer, basketball, rugby, and rode in a quad that won several gold medals. At 12, diagnosed as an auditory learner, he found the frenetic yelling by his coach as a cause of anxiety, but he still loved sports. By the time he was 13, he tried out and was selected to play hockey on a rep team. It wasn't until 16 that he was exposed to coaches who regularly used misogynistic and homophobic slurs. Players reported being told to grow some balls and being yelled at in games as fucking soft by an irate, threatening coach with a jabbing finger up in the face. One coach said to our son that another player looked like a faggot. Players said coaches called them fucking pussies, fucking retards, embarrassments, pathetic, and so on.
To temper the language. I know you're being factual, but...
If it can be spoken to my son and other children in Canada, I think we can all handle it. It's not being directed at us. It's just being spoken. Is that okay?
It's just not parliamentary. I'm sorry. It's a parliamentary committee you're referring to. But thank you anyway.
The abuse to administrators, we learned from other parents that for at least a year they'd been raising alarms about abuse on 2 teams that had the same coach, who in front of the director and parents had admitted he should go on probation. Instead, administrators engaged teen athletes in multiple sham investigations. They breached confidentiality and positioned the 14 athletes who had reported abuse as liars. This defamatory insinuation was published widely by them. Despite their clear duty to protect children from abuse, administrators acted with wanton or reckless disregard for their lives and safety. They not only failed to protect, they added betrayal trauma to the abuse, which is documented in research as being very, very destructive. In this context, let us review Canada's criminal negligence law. Quote, everyone is criminally negligent who A, in doing anything, or B, in omitting to do anything this is his duty to do, shows wanton or reckless disregard for the lives or safety of other persons. Negligence is exponentially more serious when one has fiduciary duty for children, youth, and young adults. It is well documented in medical, psychological, psychiatric, neuroscientific, and neurobiological research that exposing children to repeat homophobia and misogyny, yelling in the face, belittling, shaming, humiliating, assaulting, threatening, and punishing for speaking up do significant, long-lasting, life-threatening damage to the brain and body. All forms of child abuse and neglect, and even abuse in adulthood, are extensively documented to damage brain architecture and leave neurological scars visible on brain scans, lead to midlife chronic illness, and push some victims onto the path of criminality or suicide. Let us note, suicide is the 2nd leading cause of death in our youth populations and is on the rise. A judicial inquiry is not needed to hear reports of abuse from athletes. They have already reported in great numbers across all sports. A judicial inquiry is needed to figure out why administrators and all others with oversight whose wanton or reckless disregard for the lives and safety of athletes, as well as their alleged victims, are not being charged with negligence. Our son chose not to play on the hockey rep team at 13. Hockey was one of many sports he gave up in order to give his full attention to basketball. The abuse done to our son, described above, took place on a high school basketball team, and the coaches were certified teachers. The Commissioner for Teacher Regulation and the Ombudsperson's Office covered up the abuse. The abusive teacher said our son was one of the best players the school had ever seen in a 100-year history. He'd be sought after on college teams, along with 5 other athletes. Our son, an award-winning athlete, refused to play his final year for the abusive teachers, and he thereby sacrificed his dream of playing at university. I resigned in protest from that school as a teacher and began teaching at another one. Within 3 years at the new school, I witnessed firsthand the Commissioner for Teacher Regulation covering up more abuse. 2 educators were exposed as sexually grooming students. One was an administrator, formerly an English teacher. The other was the school principal. The English teacher now lives with his victim in England, as after he taught at another province in Canada, he is now teaching, he is barred from teaching in British Columbia. The Commissioner's public discipline report whitewashes his grooming and sexual abuse with the vague statement that he wrote, quote-unquote, inappropriate text messages. He works in a development capacity with teachers. The principal's victim, even though she had attempted suicide, was asked to participate in a restorative justice process so that the principal would not be charged. The Commissioner did not publicly discipline the principal nor put any restrictive measures on his teaching certificate.
You to wrap up. We can get some of your testimony on questions.
He did not reach out to teaching certificate to ensure he did not reach out to his victim ever again. The principal reached out again to his victim. He met with her while she was at university. Half a year later, she killed herself at the age of 19. These are my final statements. Research conducted by former federal Deputy Minister Anne-Marie Robinson and the Canadian Centre for Child Protection documents that student sexual abuse in Canadian schools is on the rise. School administrators are ill-equipped and suffer like sport organizations from conflict of interest. Too often, they neglect to keep children safe. A new, fully independent body that receives and acts on abuse reports needs to be established to eliminate the conflict of interest and/or political interference that results in a wanton or reckless disregard for the safety of the...
Ms. Fraser, some of your testimony will come out on the question and answer segment. Thank you very much. And now I go to Ms. Sandemeyer-Graves. And Ms. Sandemeyer-Graves, for 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and distinguished members of the committee. My name is Alison Sandemeyer-Graves, and I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Canadian Women in Sport. My pronouns are she, her. Canadian Women in Sport is a national nonprofit with a 52-year history of work as the leading voice and authority on women and sport. We believe in the power of sport as a platform for advancing equity for women across all areas of society. As such, we are committed to creating a more equitable and inclusive sport system that empowers women and girls as participants and leaders within sport and also through sport. As our mission implies, our focus is on systems change, working with organizations and leaders on solutions that will permanently improve the sport system. Through our research, advocacy, and programs, we empower sport organizations and leaders to bring gender equity to life in their work. In doing this work, we work extensively across all levels of the sports system in all provinces and territories. In 2021-22 alone, we engaged and impacted 2,700 sport leaders and more than 750 sport organizations. I share this as evidence of our unique and extensive insight into the process of systems change across the sport system. On the subject of safe sport, and specifically how to create a truly safe, welcoming, and inclusive sport system, I wish to share the following insights and observations.
Ms. Sandemeyer-Graves, there was a bit of interruption in the sound
Sure.
system. Is it fixed? Yes, it's good. All right, continue,
Okay.
please.
Thank you. I wish to share the following insights and observations. As I shared in my remarks to the Standing Committee on the Status of Women in November, the movements for gender equity and for safety in sport are inextricably linked. One cannot be achieved without the other. Gender inequity and unsafe sport are both structural, systemic issues that share many characteristics. They are rooted in a sports system built in another era based on societal values and norms that are out of step with contemporary Canadian society. They are deeply embedded in policies, practices, budgets, and cultures, making them highly normalized and very difficult to disrupt. And unfortunately, the burden of advocating for and leading systems change typically falls to those being oppressed. These are people working from a place of relatively limited power, and doing this work puts them in an even more precarious position. It is emotional, exhausting, endless work that comes at a high personal cost. While Hockey Canada is a significant example of these structural issues at play, there is clear evidence of this throughout the sports system. This indicates that while the circumstances of a given incident may be unique, the conditions giving rise to these incidents are not. To prevent maltreatment and gender inequity, we must look at these structural issues systemically, effectively looking at the root causes versus the symptoms. I offer the following lessons from the fight for gender equity over the past 42 years in hopes that it will help to accelerate progress for safe sport. To date, when dealing with gender inequity, the scale and scope of the solutions have not matched the scope of the problem. The result within the gender equity movement is change that is exceptionally slow, piecemeal, quick to regress, and ultimately voluntary, with organizations and leaders opting out entirely as they wish. Without persistent, consequential accountability and incentive structures, we have had to rely only on organizations and leaders' innate desire to change and the prospect of natural consequences for those who do not. If we want safe sport to have a different trajectory, we need to be prepared to think and act bigger. The goal must be systemic transformation. Tweaks and one-off programs that leave the current operating system intact are inadequate. Transformation means a comprehensive, values-based overhaul of how we design, implement, and measure sport in Canada, with government policy and investment aligned and supportive. We need more than a rejection of the status quo. We need a new vision for sport with a right-sized strategy to get us there, grounded in a clear-eyed understanding of the current system from the grassroots to high performance. As such, I repeat our call for a national inquiry or another appropriate mechanism that will help us realize this outcome for the entire sports system. We believe that this effort will have powerful, positive impacts across multiple structural issues and contribute directly to creating a truly inclusive sports system that produces the highest value
30 seconds,
in the
please.
lives of the highest value in the lives of all Canadians. As ever, Canadian Women in Sport is committed to working with Sport Canada and the national sport community to help realize this potential. Thank you.
Very much. And I now go to the third witness. For 5 minutes, please, global athlete represented by Rob Kohler. 5 minutes, please, Mr. Kohler.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, members of the committee. Today, I'm not going to detail the stories of abuse from survivors from 15 sports and the thousands of athletes that have come forward with experience of physical, sexual, financial, and emotional abuse and lack of equality that have been met with little remedy. We've already heard and acknowledged from the Minister of Sport and the Prime Minister of Canada on several occasions that sport is in a crisis in Canada. It's time to act now for a judicial inquiry. Today, I want to focus on the complex, tangled web of sport dysfunction that has enabled abuse and corruption, along with the lack of transparency and the accountability that perpetuates it, all of which is bred by the inherent power imbalance between sport administrators and athletes. The world of sport and global sport model set by the International Olympic Committee is replicated in almost every country. By design, this model relies on an intricate network of people and practices veiled under the accepted strategy of sport autonomy. For example, just last week, an email publicly shown by the International Olympic Committee asked all national Olympic committees to influence their governments to allow Russia and Belarus to compete at the 2024 Paris Olympic Games. In Canada, over the past year, we've seen a tangled web to come to light. We've seen Hockey Canada with hidden financial accounts used to hide abuse issues, and more recently, athletes questioning the transparency of Soccer Canada and Soccer Canada business. These organizations hold non-profit status with separate entities to raise and distribute money, with little to no oversight. How many other sports in Canada have similar entities? This inquiry is needed to look at the tangled web of how sport operates in Canada. It needs to take a deep dive into the real and perceived conflicts of interests that exist. Let me give you some examples. On the Podium receives over $2.9 million from the Canadian government and is also funded by the Canadian Olympic Committee, the Canadian Olympic Foundation, and the Canadian Paralympic Committee. Who has oversight of the On the Podium? Why does this organization exist? Is it another offshoot similar to what we've seen from Hockey Canada and Soccer Canada business? I'd like to look at the legal community. A lawyer in Canada is required to carry out a due diligence before taking on a client, but for some reason, sport allows them to circumvent this practice. For researchers, we need to ask why independent researchers are finding them in positions of power within Canadian sport organizations and influencing Canadian sport policy makers. For investigations, we have to take a deep dive into these so-called independent investigations that not only have existing relationships with sport, but are being paid to protect the brand of the sport that's paying them to do the investigation. Who is representing the athletes? In all these scenarios, it's akin to the fox guarding the henhouse. We need to understand why so many staff and board members that have been trying to be agents of change find themselves silenced with non-disclosure agreements, and why it's acceptable that Canadian athletes are forced into silence when they become part of the national team. We need to understand the relationship between national sport organizations and provincial sport organizations. National sport organizations mandate that provincial sport organizations filter registration fees to them, but yet convenient arguments that they have no oversight and accountability to the provincial sport organizations. They're all part of convenient, tangled arguments that avoid accountability and oversight. Over the past year, the parliamentary committees have heard from the Minister of Sport, Sport Canada, and heads of sport, all either defending the current system or agreeing to take on recommendations that are put forward to improve the system with no mandatory implementation. They all have admitted the system is not working and needs to be
30
improved.
seconds.
We have heard directly from the committee that the Sport Canada is not fit for purpose. They have all proven that they don't have the tools and the systems in place to demand accountability. Freezing funding and resignations are all Band-Aid solutions that don't get to the root of the problem. The Office of the Integrity Commissioner was created by the very same people that have been a part of the problem. Let's stop relying on anecdotal evidence from people who are entrenched in the system and who have inherent conflicts of interest. Please don't take my word for it. That would be anecdotal as well. Launch a judicial investigation is the only way that to truly understand the Canadian sports system. This government has an opportunity
Please wrap
to reform
up. You have
Sport
gone
Canada
over time, please, Mr.
globally, and you did it with the Dublin Inquiry, and now it's time to launch an integrity and a national-wide inquiry to be agents of change. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And now we're going to go to the question and answer. Because of the time limits we have, this is going to be only one round. It's going to be the 6-minute round for everyone. And I'm going to begin with the Conservatives. For 6 minutes, Ms. Thomas, 6 minutes, please. Rachel.
Thank you. Mr. Kohler, you just stated that there's Band-Aid solutions that are at work. If those are the Band-Aid solutions, then what would it take to create real change?
We hear a lot of people asking and indicating what they think should change. And that's what we've seen time and time again. And that's why a judicial inquiry is so important. Because instead of people giving anecdotal evidence, we need to get to the root and the rod of the problem of where conflicts of interest exists and how we really create a robust system, whether it's to empower OSIC or have OSIC independent of sport. That's what's needed.
So in the event that a national inquiry doesn't take place, right now you have a mic, what would the recommendations be that you would give to this committee? Give us your top two.
Top two would be that Safe Sport in Canada is independent of sport and is not linked with sport. It's managed by human rights experts. And the second would be that athletes in this country have independent collective representation to look after their interests when they come forward or when they have disputes. Right now, there's a power imbalance. Sport yields all the powers, and athletes have none.
So right now, you're representing about 600 or so individuals who are kind of under your advocacy, your voice, correct?
We don't represent, we advocate for.
Right.
That's
so
correct.
Am I correct in saying there's about 600 or so?
There's more than 600.
Okay. How did those individuals come to Global Athlete for support? How did they even find out that it existed?
Global Athlete has been working internationally for the past several years. They were let down by the Canadian system. They had nowhere to turn, and as a result, they turned to us. And I think that inherently is a problem. It speaks volumes to itself that these athletes had to come to an international organization for assistance in Canada.
Now, how many of those athletes would be Canadian or would have been involved in Canadian sport?
Well, of the 600 plus, we have over 1,000 that we've worked with in Canada.
Okay, specific to Canada.
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. In an article that you were interviewed by ESPN for, you said that you're not linked with sport, and you are not linked with government, and you are not linked with the anti-doping organization, and therefore that makes Global Athlete trustworthy. Why is it important that these links don't exist?
We're not pressured by anyone other than the athletes. So we get our narrative and our directive from athletes from a grassroots level. They sign off on everything. My statement today was shown to the athletes before coming here, which was approved by the athletes. We represent them or we advocate for them, and we have no undue influence from external sources.
Mr. Kohler, you offered your resignation from WADA. What was the reason for that?
I mean, that's a complex question. I was standing up strong towards Russia. I was principled in my not letting Russia back. And myself and my organization came to a head where we didn't agree, and it was time for me to leave. I was pressured, I was bullied, and I was intimidated. And I continue to have that to this day in my role because I'm representing athletes and fighting the system.
I realize this is a bit of an awkward question, and it's one that unfortunately will come up at this committee probably several times over, and that is, I think one of the things that we're realizing based on the FIBO study and even the witnesses that have appeared here is that things are more complex than they seem, and no one seems 100% innocent, to be very honest. And so I'm curious to know, are there any complaints against you?
Are there complaints against me?
Yes.
No.
Perfect. Ms. Fraser, thank you for joining us here today. I believe I have a minute and a half left. Ms. Fraser, you spoke a lot about, I believe it's your son's experience, correct? Okay. I'm curious as to your observation, perhaps as a mother with a son in sports who was significantly bullied, and I'm very sorry to hear that. And I would imagine that you're also privy to the stories of many others. I'd be curious to know what you would identify as the gaps in the system that prevent athletes from being protected or feeling safe to come forward.
I think it's a question of all children in Canada. I think it's athletes. I think it's kids in church. I think it's kids in school, as I tried to make clear today. I think children in Canada aren't safe. I think youth aren't safe, and I think young adults aren't safe, regardless of what they're doing. So I think it's a real failure in laws, and that's why I felt thankful that you are caring so much about this and gave me a chance to speak. I research abuse, and I research what it does to the brain specifically. And so that's what I write about. And I was a teacher at the same time as I was a mother in that school system, and I went to a different school and was appalled to find out it was the same situation. So I'm just one story, but I took student athlete testimonies, and what they were expected to endure at the hands of certified teachers is horrifying.
What is the number one thing that you notice in terms of the impact it has on the child's brain throughout adult life?
It damages it. And you can see it on a brain scan. It physically damages the brain.
Thank you very much. much. And now I go to the Liberals for 6 minutes. Michael Coteau. Before we turn on the stopwatch, Michael, are you, we can't hear you. Are you muted?
Can you hear
I
me
think
now?
you are also frozen now, Michael.
Can you hear me though?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry about
Begin.
that, Madam Chair. And I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today and for your testimonies. I want to start with a quick question to Mrs. Fraser. Thank you so much for sharing your family story. And, you know, it is a tragic story to listen to, the amount of damage that can be applied to a young child and carry throughout their lifetime. I think you referred to it as life-lasting damage. And I just want to say that it's completely unacceptable. And thank you for being here to advocate for all children in this country. I've always noticed that the education system, the provincial sports systems, the private, national, there's systems within systems, within a system. Do you have any advice on how we could better coordinate those systems? Because the jurisdiction, you know, some fall under school board, some province, some national. Is there any advice on how we can bring, you know, the accountability together under, you know, maybe a single system, or at least coordinate it so best practices and strategies are presented? Any advice to us?
You've just described it perfectly yourself. We need a separate parliamentary body that is, as many people have said, it can't have any influence. So it can't have political influence, it can't have school influence, education influence, it can't have sport influence. It just needs to be about abuse. You start in kindergarten teaching children and their parents and everyone that when you have an abuse issue, this is the exact body you go to, and it's only about child abuse, and they handle it, they address it, they have no conflict of interest, and this is being looked at as a model. I'm not the one that came up with this brilliant idea. Others did, and I will share it in my 10 pages that I'm going to submit, but there is research that shows that that would be exactly the answer to make significant change. And I also believe, as I tried to say in my presentation, we've gotten to a terrible place where we hold children and youth very stringently accountable by our laws, and the laws do not apply to people who are in positions of power over children, and that's a great problem. I think we need to change that dynamic.
Yeah, the system has to be built for children, not for adults, right? I think that's what you're saying. Yeah, I agree with you. You know, there's a lot of change that's necessary. Thank you so much. I wanted to just to move over to Sanmir Graves, I think the name was. I apologize if I messed your name up. Back in 2016, the Ontario government, I was the former minister for sport in Ontario, and we put together a provincial strategy for sport. And I was astonished with some of the statistics that came out of that. In fact, I went back to that publication that was presented 7 years ago, and it said that, and I was just astonished that at the NCCP level 5, 89% of coaches in our province of Ontario were male and 11% female. And then I remember someone saying to us about the Winter Olympics and the statistics of women athletes and the coaches that they had, and the numbers were almost similar to that. It was like 10% female coaches, 90% male coaches, even with the female athletes. I think that there's I don't think anyone would question that the more female coaches in the system, the more empowerment and role modeling and the stronger the overall system would become. Do you have any advice to this committee on how we can, what the federal government should be doing to encourage young women to remain in sports longer, because I know the retention rate is much lower than males, but also how to develop even further leadership for female role models and female coaches within the system? Any advice to us?
Well, I really appreciate you shining a light on that 2016 report and the strategy and the data that informed it. And unfortunately, I would say coaching is one area that just seems very resistant to improve when it comes to the numbers, despite many interventions. I think what's really important to consider is that girls and women love sport. They want to participate. They want opportunities to lead. We see that time and time again. What they come up against are structural, gender-based barriers to accessing those opportunities. Everything from accessing ice time when you're a player, when you're a girls' team, to being considered in a candidate pool, seriously considered in a candidate pool for the coaching opportunities at the highest level. There's still a lot of gender bias in the way that sport is led and the decisions that are made, and also in the ways that policies are structured and so on that really do privilege men over women still at this point. So
15 seconds. Thank you.
I'll leave it there.
Wrap up. You have 15 seconds to wrap up. Go ahead. Did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Oh, so yes, thank you. So I think really addressing those systemic barriers, working with the organizations who are the ones that really hold the responsibility for designing and delivering sport. Therefore, it's their responsibility to remove those barriers so that girls and women can thrive.
Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much. And we now go to the Bloc Québécois. Sébastien Lemire, 6 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Yes, thank you, Chair. First of all, thanks to all the witnesses for their attendance and for the testimony that they've brought forward to support an independent public inquiry on sports. I'll begin with you, Madam Fraser. It was a very touching presentation. I'm glad we were able to provide you a space to be heard. You contributed to a podcast recently where you spoke of restorative justice, and you sort of sounded the alarm, the abuse that this could lead to children. That they don't get back to a normal life after this. What do you answer to researchers like Mr. Donnelly or Mr. Kidd or others who came and proposed this to the committee?
Justice is so dangerous is because I've actually seen it put in process myself at both of those schools. The first school tried to use restorative justice in order to, they had put the athletes into the position of saying publicly they were liars when they reported abuse. And so they were now supposed to do restorative justice to clear their names, I guess, or get forgiven by the coaches that had abused them. So it was psychotic, essentially, and parents refused in scathing terms to have their children put through yet another manipulation. In the second school that I was at, as I said in my statement very quickly, that they offered restorative justice because they were trying to get the principal off so he wouldn't get sex abuse charges. And then they decided she was so mentally ill, this girl, that she wouldn't be able to handle it. But this is what happened to her brain. She basically couldn't tell if she was the victim or the perpetrator, just like they tried to do with the other students by the time they were done. And restorative justice was developed by Katie Hutchinson. Her husband had been beaten to death by drunken young people at a random party. They didn't even know who he was. They went to jail. And she decided that this teenager, this young 20-something, should be saved. Like, he shouldn't spend the rest of his life in jail with a criminal record. And she set out to restore justice between him and her random drunken activity. That is not the same thing as an adult in a position of trust and authority who abuses children. Like, you can't compare those two scenarios. There's no place for restorative justice in this sport situation that we're dealing with. It's manipulative and destructive.
Mais je comprends donc l'importance qu'il puisse y
So I understand the importance that it has to be an independent, autonomous mechanism so that people can have faith in the system. The situation that occurs in these schools or in other sporting organizations, it doesn't have this autonomy. The victim cannot complain and get away with it. So thank you very much. I think that I'm taking. Can you talk to us about your experience, please, sir?
Global Athlete has been standing side by side with Ukrainian athletes to ask that Russia and Belarus be suspended from the Paralympic Games. And as a result of our advocacy work with the Ukrainian athletes, on Friday I received a letter directly from the president, which I don't take as a letter to me, I take it as a letter to all the athletes that are standing in support of Ukraine.
Enfin, je pense que c'est digne de mention, surtout dans...
Well, I thought it was worth mentioning. It's quite honorable, and I wanted to just point it out. I think you followed with interest the testimony that occurred at the Status of Women Committee and at Heritage as well. What elements could we include in an independent judicial inquiry concerned with sports?
That question before, Madam Chair. I've been asked that question before, and one of the answers I always give is, if there's going to be a judicial inquiry, it's not for Rob Keeler or for Jennifer Fraser to determine what the scope is. A judicial inquiry should be given to a justice to give him or her free scope of what the inquiry should look like, so it's not influenced by others. The topic is there, the issue is there, and a broad sweeping mandate should be provided. So it's not really in my position to offer that expertise.
Mais une des questions...
One of the issues that is still unresolved, and what form should such a public inquiry take?
Public inquiry should be a judicial inquiry that has the power of subpoena, the ability to attach every part of the sport in Canada, whether it's provincial, national, Sport Canada, every aspect needs to... The reason for the judicial inquiry is not to bring down the system. It's to get a deep understanding of how the system works, to improve it for the future of every child and every athlete in this country. We do not want to hurt sport. We want to see it succeed, flourish, and thrive. And by doing that, I think we could be not only models for Canada, but models for the rest of the world by creating this new sport environment that is unique, it's different, and that can be embraced, and every parent in the country will want to put their children in sport.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Sebastien, I now go to... you were 5 seconds under. That's very kind of you.
Et je sais que vous avez été généreuse au tour précédent.
Well, you've been quite generous, so that's fine.
Peter Julian, 6 minutes, Peter. And before we go on, we have an extra 8 minutes that the committee can stay here and finish our work beyond 5:30.
Yes, that may be true, Madam Chair, but I am hoping to finally get home after 3 weeks and several failed attempts to get through to Vancouver, and my flight leaves. Yes, so I'd prefer that we not extend the time if possible. I'd like to thank our witnesses. Thank you for your very compelling testimony. I just have the time for 2 very brief questions, and then I will be moving a motion. It is just because we've run out of time that I will have to do that during this questioning session. Madame Fraser, my first brief question is to you. What would you advise the federal government to be doing now? I mean, we're talking about a national inquiry, a judicial inquiry, that's very important, but what are the things that the federal government could be doing right away?
Right now, they need to look at why nobody's being held negligent when they're obviously breaking Canadian criminal law. I don't understand why that's not happening. So that needs to be number one. That needs to be looked at very intensely. Why are these individuals that we all read about in the media every day, and you've heard many, many talks about? I mean, you know, it's the same thing with a priest in the church. Oh, he gets excommunicated. Really? Why is he not in jail? Same thing here. These people are committing negligence. They are not protecting the safety and lives of children. How come they're not being held criminally accountable? I'd like to see a lot more of that and a lot less of our young people acting in such shocking, appalling, violent, sickening ways. That's at the hands of adults. You do not become an unnaturally abusive person like that unless you've been in a toxic masculinity environment. That's not natural. So why do we keep blaming downstream the kids and not the adults, number one? And then secondly, Judicial inquiry, I know it takes time, but there's no reason we can't start right now creating a body independent from sport, school, church, whatever, that takes in complaints, addresses them, and they're experts. They're experts in child abuse. That's all we need.
Thank you. Thank you very much for those answers. Madame Sandmeyer-Graves, you made the link between gender equity and safety in sport very eloquently, I thought. The reality is we are seeing currently an example of the lack of gender equity in sport. It's around the issue of the national women's soccer team and its treatment by Canada Soccer. Do you see that as an example of why we need to ensure that safety in sport and gender equity are twin priorities to ensure overall safety in sports?
Absolutely. I think that they are, I don't know if it's two sides of the same coin or how you might phrase it, but very much interlinked. And in fact, gender-based discrimination is prohibited under the UCCMS, as are, forms of racism and other forms of discrimination and harm that are directed at athletes and others within the sports system. I think there's a risk of always conflating safe sport or unsafe sport with abuse or with sexual abuse specifically. But really what we are talking about is creating environments in which people can show up as their full authentic selves and feel psychologically and physically safe to be vulnerable, to put themselves out there, to try hard and to go for it in whatever way best suits them. And when women are continuously devalued, told that they are worth less than men in many different ways, that does not create psychological safety, and it opens the door to many other forms of abuse.
Thank you very much. And on that note, I will now move my motion, Madam Chair. It's already been distributed to committee members, that in relation to the study on safe sport in Canada, the committee schedule a meeting in March 2023 to study allegations of unequal treatment of the Canadian women's national soccer team and allegations of sexual abuse within soccer programs, and invite the current president and CEO of Soccer Canada to testify. And on that note, I think we all stand with Christine Sinclair and the national team. I put forward the motion. If any member of this committee would prefer that it be a subpoena rather than an invitation, I am perfectly willing to entertain that as a friendly amendment.
We are able to do so if we do not get a positive response from Soccer Canada. So is there anyone objecting to this motion? Anyone wanting to discuss it further? Is there unanimous agreement? Chris, you wanted to say something?
We might want to add the subpoena just to keep things moving along the lines. Invitation, if not, then subpoena. I guess I'll only put the fine point. I know Mr. Julie and I discussed it. There is an element of discrimination, and it goes into what we were just talking about in terms of the value. But I don't necessarily want to, if we're dealing with a issue of labor versus and labor dispute, though discrimination is at the heart of it, are we taking away from what we're discussing everywhere else? But it's something that we support, and I think we should, in order to expedite things, invite, and then if not, subpoena, and make sure that's right in the motion.
So are you suggesting an amendment? Yes. Chris, would you like to suggest where it would go very quickly?
J'en fais la proposition, Madame la Présidente.
I'll move it as a motion if I can, Madam Chair.
Have we done it?
Just a clarification. The term wouldn't be subpoena, it would be issuing a summons from the committee.
Perhaps it's just easier to invite or, as needed, issue a summons to the current president.
Any objection to that particular amendment? All right, hearing none, that amendment obviously passes. So can we vote on the amended motion? Everyone's in agreement. Is there any objection? So that is unanimously passed. Thank you very much, Peter, for bringing this up and for everyone being so collegial about this.
Point of order. Just very quickly, Madam Chair, with your ruling with respect to unparliamentary language, and I think it's something we might want to discuss further. We're going to be hearing a lot of things that are unparliamentary, and my preference would be that we treat this like a court, that if it's a quote or something that's heard, that's something that goes into the record, and perhaps that's something we can discuss with the clerk later, because as unparliamentary language, we're referring to an honourable member, it may not be unparliamentary, but if we're coming up with recommendations and trying to come up with evidence, it may be something that we need to hear and may be on the record. But that I understand we're running low on time, but something to discuss going forward.
So I think one of the things we need to talk about is not so much as to whether it's unparliamentary, but that it's a public session and there may be children or others looking at this because they play sport. I don't know. So that's something we can discuss in some way or form later on.
Je sais que nous avons fait une demande pour que la ministre...
I know that we'd made a request that officials from Sports Canada appear. I'd like to make sure that we get them to come for a 2-hour session so we can talk about the measures that they're going to take in the new Canadian policy on safe sport in Canada and the measures that could be taken and to look at what's happening in the provinces. I'd rather that this occur sooner than later because we need to hear from them.
The minister and the officials were invited as a group for 2 hours, and I think until when we'll have to depend on their availability. I hear you, Sebastian. Yes, Marilyn?
Yes, absolutely. It depends on availability. But what I would say is I'd rather see the minister and the department staff before they put their framework in place. Otherwise, every time we ask a question, we'll just get, well, that's the reason we put this framework in place. So,
Marilyn, all right. If there's no further discussion, we'd like to, yes?
I think just for further certainty, there was an email that was sent out from the clerk just indicating that the sport minister asked to appear, later on. I think what you're hearing from us and from the bloc is that we actually would like to hear from the sport minister sooner rather than later. If we feel the need to bring her back later, once the framework is in place, then we can hear from her twice. But we'd really like to have it toward the beginning of the study because we believe that would allow us to establish a bit of a starting point or a foundation.
We'll obviously convey that message to the minister and to the department, but once again, we're down to the availability issue. So thank you, and I now deem this meeting to be adjourned.
Merci aux